All right. So you sent over a ton of stuff on this NCC Ltd company.
Yeah.
Investor presentations, financials, all that. Looks like we're doing a deep dive into their Q2 performance for FY25.
Right.
Excited to jump in, see what we find.
NCC is a really interesting company to look at. I mean, we're talking about India's second largest construction company,
Yeah.
publicly listed.
Wow.
And their projects are all over the place. Highways, metros,
Hmm.
water treatment plants. They're even getting into coal mining.
Okay, so that's a lot. So I guess what you're saying is how they're doing can tell us something about how the whole infrastructure sector in India is going.
You got it. They're almost like a,
Yeah.
like a bellwether for the whole industry.
Yeah.
Their results can give us an idea of the trends, challenges, opportunities in that whole space.
Okay, helpful. So let's get into the numbers.
Right.
This revenue figure pops out right away. 5,224 crore.
Right.
That's a 10.1% jump year over year.
Yeah, that's a big jump, especially when you compare it to their 3.9% growth last quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like their business is picking up steam.
Okay, 10.1% more revenue.
Yeah.
Sounds good on the surface, but what's it actually tell us about their financial health?
Well, revenue is just one piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
To really see how healthy they are financially, we need to dig into their profitability, debt levels,
Right.
and their order book.
Okay. Can you remind me what order book means?
Sure. It's basically just a list of all the projects a company's been hired to do.
Okay.
It kind of shows their future revenue.
Right.
So a really strong order book means they have a lot of work lined up,
Got it.
which is usually a good sign for continued growth.
What does NCC's order book look like?
Right now, it's at a giant 52,370 crore.
Wow.
That's a huge number.
52,370. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious,
Yeah.
where are all these projects and what's that tell us about their strategy?
Good question. They've spread their order book across a bunch of different areas.
Mm-hmm.
Their buildings division is a big chunk, 37%.
Okay.
Transportation is 21%. Then water and environment is another 21%.
Got it.
This mix shows they're not relying on just one thing and are ready to use opportunities across the whole infrastructure scene.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
Smart, especially in a shaky market.
Yeah.
But you mentioned profitability.
Right.
What are we seeing there? And can you remind me what EBITDA is again, just so I'm clear?
Right. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization.
Okay.
It basically tells you how much profit a company is making from their main operations
Okay.
before you factor in stuff like financing costs and other expenses that aren't part of the core business.
Gotcha.
So for NCC, their EBITDA for Q2 FY25 was 8.5% of revenue.
8.5%.
Mm.
Good or bad? How does that compare to how they've done before?
It's respectable, but a bit lower than what they've done in some past quarters. This might mean there are some cost pressures, maybe because of things like the price of cement and steel going up, or maybe it's because of the types of projects they're doing. You know, some are just naturally more profitable than others.
Okay, so profitability is something to keep an eye on. Now, debt. Their net debt's at 1,528 crore. Should we be worried?
Debt's pretty normal in construction, especially for companies like NCC that take on these huge projects.
Right.
It lets them fund growth, take on new opportunities, but too much debt can put a strain on profits.
Right.
The key is to manage that debt well.
So how's NCC handling their debt?
We got to look at stuff like their debt-to-equity ratio, their interest coverage ratio, how much cash they're bringing in,
Okay.
to really figure out how well they're managing it. They have said they're committed to deleveraging.
Oh, I was going to ask about that. Basically, paying down their debt and becoming more stable. Right.
Exactly. Deleveraging is usually a good sign for investors.
Yeah.
Shows they're being careful with their money.
Makes sense.
And it can make the company look better to lenders and investors over the long term.
Okay, so we got a decent overview of their revenue, order book, profitability, debt. Now, I want to get into what the people in charge are saying about all of this.
Yeah, their commentary can give us some great insights into their strategy, what they're looking at for the future,
Right.
and the challenges they're facing. Let's dive into that next. They seem pretty optimistic about the future, especially with all the infrastructure plans India has. They think NCC is in a good spot to take advantage of all that growth.
Okay, so they're feeling good about the future, but what are they actually saying about how they plan to do that?
Well, they pointed out a few key things they're focusing on.
Okay.
One is expanding geographically, tapping into new markets, maybe even going international.
Interesting. So not just sticking to where they already are. Why is expanding so important?
It's a smart way to make their revenue more diverse
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
lower their risk. If one area's economy slows down, having a presence in other areas can help.
Right, right. What else are they focusing on?
Another big thing is technology.
Okay.
They really want to use technology to make things more efficient.
Uh-huh.
So things like digital project management tools, building information modeling,
Yeah.
even looking at using artificial intelligence in construction.
So they're not afraid to try new things. How can those technologies actually help their business?
Well, they can lead to better project planning and execution, better cost control.
Hmm.
For example, building information modeling lets you visualize and coordinate things better during the design and construction phases,
Okay.
so you have fewer errors and delays.
Sounds like they're trying to stay ahead of the game. Anything else they mentioned?
Yeah, they talked about being committed to sustainability, which is becoming more and more important in construction.
What does sustainability look like for NCC?
Things like green building practices, cutting down on waste during construction, and maybe even using renewable energy for their projects.
It's good that they're thinking about the environment.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked strategy and outlook. Now can we get into some details about the projects they're working on?
Sure. Let's look at a few examples that really show what they can do.
Okay.
One that stood out to me is their part in the Mumbai Coastal Road Project.
Mm-hmm.
They're building a twin tunnel that'll really help with traffic in the city.
That's a big project. What's so special about it?
It shows they know how to handle these really complex infrastructure projects, and they're committed to solving those urban problems.
Right.
This project will make a huge difference to Mumbai's transportation and to millions of people who commute every day.
That's impressive. What about other sectors? You mentioned water projects earlier, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's that massive wastewater treatment plant they're building in Malad, Mumbai.
Okay.
It's a good example of how they get involved in projects that are good for both the economy and the environment.
How so?
It'll make sanitation way better and help clean up the water. So it's good for public health and good for the environment.
A win-win. Okay, so big city projects. Are they involved in anything in rural areas too?
Yeah, they're working on a major water supply project in Agra, which will bring clean drinking water to a bunch of villages in that region.
That's so important for improving health and,
Yeah,
people's livelihoods in those communities.
right.
Good to see they're not just focused on the big cities. So infrastructure projects, check. I'm also curious about their real estate business. It's not all roads and bridges, right?
Nope. NCC, Urban Infrastructure Limited, a subsidiary of NCC, is a big player in real estate.
What kind of projects do they do?
They've got a mix, everything from residential townships and high-rise apartments to commercial complexes. They've finished over 11.7 million square feet of built-up area, and they've got another 2.8 million square feet that they're still building.
Where are these projects?
In big cities across India, Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Chennai.
Okay.
They cater to all sorts of customers, from affordable housing to luxury stuff.
So it sounds like they have a good track record with projects in different areas. But like any business, they probably have some challenges. What are they facing in the current market?
One of the toughest things in construction is rising costs of materials.
Right.
The prices of cement, steel, those have been all over the place.
Yeah.
And that can hurt how profitable a project is.
Makes sense. Unpredictable prices for materials can make it tough to manage costs and make sure those projects stay profitable. What other challenges are there?
Competition's a big one. The Indian construction market is super competitive, with companies from India and other countries all fighting for projects.
Yeah, so they have to stay on top of their game and find ways to stand out to win those contracts.
Exactly. They're doing that by focusing on innovation, using technology, and building strong relationships with their clients.
Okay.
They're also looking at getting into more different types of projects, so they're not relying so much on any one sector.
Smart. Adapting to the changing market.
Right.
We've talked about their internal challenges. What about external factors? What's the overall economy doing to their business?
Well, India's economy is doing well right now, growing pretty strong, which is usually good for construction and infrastructure.
Can you explain that a bit more? Why is economic growth good for NCC?
When the economy's strong, the government usually spends more on infrastructure.
Okay.
And as a major player in that area, NCC is in a good position to get some of that spending.
But we're also seeing interest rates going up.
Right.
And inflation all over the world.
Yeah.
How do those things affect things?
Those are definitely things to think about. When interest rates go up, it gets more expensive for companies like NCC to borrow money for their projects, which can affect their profits. And high inflation can make it harder to make money if costs are going up faster than revenues.
So they got to walk a fine line,
Yeah,
take advantage of the opportunities from India's growth, but also manage the risks from these bigger economic trends.
exactly. It takes good planning, smart decisions, and being efficient to navigate all that.
Okay, we've covered a lot.
Yeah,
Financials, their strategy, their outlook, looked at some key projects, talked about the economy in general.
Yep.
Now, I want to go back to those key things we learned from their Q2 FY25 results.
sure.
What stands out?
Overall, NCC had really impressive revenue growth,
Mm-hmm.
driven by a strong order book and that mix of different projects.
Right.
But profitability is something to watch.
Okay.
Their margins have been squeezed a bit, probably because of things like rising input costs
Yeah.
and the specific types of projects they're doing.
And we can't forget about that debt level,
Right.
which they're trying to manage by deleveraging.
Yeah, how well they manage that debt will be really important for them to keep growing and dealing with any economic problems that might come up.
Okay, so taking all that into account, how would you say NCC is doing overall?
I think they're in a solid spot to benefit from this infrastructure boom in India.
Mm.
They have a good track record, a diverse set of projects, and a management team that's been through these economic cycles before.
Right.
But investors should definitely pay attention to how their profitability is doing, how they're managing their debt,
Yeah,
and what the competition looks like before making any decisions.
that makes sense. Now, before we wrap up, anything else about NCC that you find particularly interesting or,
Yeah.
something that stands out? I'm curious about the leadership at NCC. Their presentation mentions a management team with like decades of experience. Makes me wonder, is that part of why they're successful?
It's definitely worth thinking about. Construction and infrastructure, those are cyclical industries.
Right.
They go up and down with the economy. Having leaders who've been through those cycles before, that's super valuable.
So they've seen some tough times. That must give them a different way of looking at risk, making those big decisions.
Oh, absolutely. They've seen it all. Booms, busts, changes in
Yeah.
policy, everything. That experience can help them see challenges coming and make smarter choices, especially in an industry that changes as much as this one.
Makes sense. Okay, last thing I wanted to get your take on. We've gone through a lot today, their financials, the projects, their strategy. For you, what's the biggest thing that stands out about NCC?
For me, it's how strong NCC is fundamentally and how good things are looking in the Indian economy.
Mm.
We've got a solid track record, a diverse set of projects, and a leadership team that's seen a lot. And they're operating in an economy that's ready for some serious infrastructure development.
Right.
It's like they're in the perfect spot.
Yeah, I see what you mean. They're ready to ride this wave of growth in India. But like we said, there's always challenges. Rising costs, competition, and all those uncertainties in the global economy.
Exactly. It's a fast-changing environment. You got to constantly adapt, keep an eye out for both opportunities and risks.
So for our listener who's been with us through all this,
Yeah.
what's the one thing they should remember?
NCC is a company to keep your eye on. They could be a sign of how India's infrastructure development is going, but a lot of things will shape their path, their own decisions, the competition, and of course, the bigger economic and political situation in India.
Good point. And I think that highlights something really important about these deep dives. It's not just about understanding one company, but also understanding everything around it.
You got it. It's all connected. How well NCC does is tied to how well India does with its infrastructure goals.
Right.
And both are affected by a bunch of things outside their control.
Well said. I think we've given our listener plenty to think about. If they want to learn more, check out NCC's website and investor relations stuff.
Good idea.
Lots of info there if you want to go deeper.
Yeah, always good to do your own research.
All right. That wraps up our deep dive into NCC Ltd.
Great discussion.
Thanks for joining us.
Of course.
We'll see you next time on the Deep Dive on the Deep Dive.